The Battle of Thermopylae is one of the most famous episodes in ancient history. Even if you know nothing about the Second Greco-Persian War, you've surely heard of how 300 Spartans tried to halt the vast army of the Persian king Xerxes and met a heroic end in an uneven fight. Let's imagine if the gods had taken mercy on the brave warriors of King Leonidas and granted them victory. What would have happened? To be clear, from this point forward, we won't be seeking historical accuracy or comparing sources. We won't dissect the writings of Herodotus or compare them to the accounts of Xerxes. Nor will we count Spartans to ascertain their exact number. For the purpose of this essay, we don't need to dwell on the specifics of Xerxes' army or Leonidas' allies. We'll also not focus on the traitor Ephialtes, the Persian emissaries thrown into the Spartan well, or the Hellespont, now known as the Dardanelles, which, upon Xerxes' orders, endured a lengthy, albeit comical, punishment. What's essential for us is that Sparta lost this battle, and Persia won. Xerxes' invasion, which brought a force of about 250,000 men to Europe, Herodotus cited a fantastic number of 2 million, posed such a serious threat to the Greek city-states that, in their struggle against the Persians, they agreed to put their grievances against each other aside. In the autumn of 481 BC, representatives of all major cities met in Corinth. This ancient congress, interestingly, many historians call it a congress, decided to confront Xerxes collectively. The only coherent strategy to counter the vast army of that era was to engage them in narrow passes or straits. Such terrains naturally neutralized the massive numerical advantage the Persians held. This approach was adopted in 3 of the 4 major battles of the war: Thermopylae, Salamis, and Artemisium. Notably, the latter 2 were naval engagements. The Greeks defended tight straits and passes, while the Persians, unable to capitalize on their numerical advantage, found themselves at a significant disadvantage. There were many suitable passes available, but Thermopylae was almost ideal. It was close enough to the cities for quick troop deployment, yet the area occupied by the Persians wouldn't be excessively vast. The Battle of Thermopylae is among the most renowned episodes of ancient history. Even if you're unfamiliar with the Second Greco-Persian War, you've likely heard of how 300 Spartans attempted to halt the massive army of Persian King Xerxes, facing a heroic demise in an uneven clash. What if, in a twist of fate, these brave warriors under King Leonidas had triumphed? What would have transpired? For the record, in this discussion, we won't be delving into the nitty-gritty of historical truths or contrasting sources. We'll accept the narrative at face value, ignoring the exact composition of Xerxes' horde or the allies of Leonidas. The focus isn't on the infamous traitor Ephialtes, the Persian emissaries thrown into a Spartan well, or the whipping of the Hellespont. The crux is Sparta's defeat and Persia's victory. When the decisive moment arrived, the pass was held by a relatively small contingent of roughly 5,000 to 7,000 men. While the core was indeed Leonidas and his personal guard, the famed 300, there were also detachments from other cities like Thebes, Thespiae, and Mycenae. The fact that the defenders weren't just 300 but 5,000 to 7,000 doesn't change much. Even taking the maximum troop count for the Greeks mentioned by Diodorus, which is 7,700, Xerxes still had a 32-fold advantage. The rest hinged on martial prowess. The Greek phalanx that barricaded the pass couldn't be outflanked, rendering the Persian cavalry ineffective. Xerxes and his forces were stalled at the entrance, unable to advance. Concerned for his fleet and supply lines, Xerxes needed to hasten, but the modest Greek force barred his way. Could it have been different? The Greeks probably wouldn't have opted for another strategy, as a face-off on open ground meant certain defeat. The confined terrain was their only shot. However, as mentioned earlier, Greece had an array of passes to defend. Thermopylae wasn't the only option. At the Corinth Assembly, the Tempe Pass on the Thessalian-Macedonian border, further north, was frequently suggested. This would mean meeting the Persians sooner and keeping them farther from Greek cities. The challenge was that Tempe lay in a region of Hellas that wasn't overtly hostile to Xerxes. Plus, an alternative route existed. Thermopylae seemed more secure, partly because the fatal path, which ultimately doomed Leonidas and his warriors, was believed to be known only to locals. However, doubts arise. By the battle's third day, barely 1,000 men remained with Leonidas. The rest hadn't perished, but retreated, fearing encirclement. This implies the secret path wasn't so covert. Another defense option was the Isthmus of Corinth. However, this would mean abandoning Athens. Themistocles, the architect of the Athenian fleet and eventual victor of the Battle of Salamis, threatened to withdraw from the war and relocate the city's population to Italy in search of new settlements if this strategy was chosen. Regarding the outcome of the battle, as mentioned earlier, due to the constraints of the narrow pass, Xerxes held no significant advantage against Leonidas's army. Over 2 days of combat, he lost 20,000 soldiers, essentially a tenth of his army. Meeting with Ephialtes was a genuine godsend for the Persian king. What would have changed? A lot, considering that the Battle of Thermopylae, no matter how valiant the Spartans were, resulted in a painful defeat for the Hellenic League. Indeed, the strategy of holding the enemy in narrow locations failed. Xerxes's army advanced. It would be more than a year before the pivotal Battle of Salamis, where the Athenians sunk the Persian fleet. Meanwhile, Xerxes invaded his adversary's land, flooding Attica and Boeotia with his soldiers. In other words, the independence of the Greek cities was at stake. In modern films and literature, the 300 Spartans are portrayed as heroes marching towards inevitable death. King Leonidas and the warriors that remained with him assumed such a role only on the third day of the battle, once their allies had abandoned them. Initially, the defense of the pass, accompanied by 5,000 to 7,000 men, didn't seem like a lost cause. It probably even seemed the opposite. The impregnable position at Thermopylae, the enemy's bound hands, and the ticking clock in their favor. Had Leonidas held the pass longer, Xerxes would have faced the repercussions of hunger, marauding, and desertion, as his army would have begun to face supply issues. Especially if the Athenian fleet implemented Themistocles' idea of attacking the pontoon bridge in the Hellespont, which the Persians used to cross from modern-day Turkey to Europe. If that had happened, Xerxes would have been trapped in foreign territory without supplies. All of this did not happen. The Greeks lost, which nearly resulted in a catastrophe for them. King Leonidas entered history as a hero who met a brave, but from the perspective of the war's progression, futile death. He didn't buy time, didn't protect Sparta, and didn't fulfill the task that was entrusted to him. Yet, he earned the reputation of a man with incredible personal valor. Had Leonidas held out longer, he would have also gained the renown of being the savior of Hellas. The story of the 300 Spartans would have been far more popular among writers, poets, and directors if it had culminated in success. Instead, the glory of being the homeland's savior went to Themistocles. Yet, culturally, little changes because even though Themistocles defeated Xerxes and fixed everything that Leonidas broke, the Spartan king is far more well known than the Athenian strategist. Every schoolchild knows of Leonidas, while Themistocles' name is only remembered by experts in ancient history.